Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Ward. I have a passion to bring hope and breakthrough to those experiencing the toughest times of their lives. In this podcast, we will give you critical insights and revelations as I interview people just like you, those who have been right where you are and understand exactly what a wilderness season is all about. It's real, it's raw, it's practical. Come join the conversation. Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Ward, and with me today is a very good friend of mine, has become a good friend and author of Square Tree. Her name is Dr. Amanda Helman, and I am just so excited to have you on the show today because you have been through your own wilderness season.
I have. And thank you for having me on, Sherry. It's a pleasure, and I'm excited to share how I've gone through the wilderness season to support the audience.
Good. Well, I'm so happy to have you on because I know as a counselor, you kind of have, I would think, both hats on. Like you could see it from the counseling hat, but then you actually experienced it. So I'm going to really love to hear kind of both sides of that. So was there one particular thing that landed you in the wilderness season?
It's a great question. I think when I began my wilderness season, which I would say was in 2011, but really I didn't go into it completely until 2015, where everything in my life was tumultuous. I was graduating school. I had a lot of relationships that had to end, was leaving being a youth leader, had a lot of pain and so many things happening at once, and felt the deepest grief and loss I've ever had in that season.
Wow. So was it the one particular thing or just things just all came to a head?
Everything came to a head. It was a time where I didn't realize God was getting me ready for deep healing to really uncover a lot of the sources of my roots and my pain.
Okay. So what do you think the wilderness season is all about now that you've kind of been through it and you're starting to come out the other side, right?
I am. At first, I began the wilderness season thinking it would be a quick journey.
Don't we all?
And I also thought, I think my response at the beginning was like all the Israelites when they started to complain and really didn't understand what it was for. And for the longest time, I thought wilderness was punishment because that was my understanding of God. That was my understanding of what am I doing wrong? My mindset back then, Sherry, was very much what am I doing wrong? What am I not doing right? When God was actually putting me there to flourish. And that is my new mindset, is that it's not a punishment, that it's actually producing fruit in there. And God recently showed me I didn't put you in the wilderness to die, because Jesus didn't die in the wilderness. Jesus flourished. When he left the wilderness, he was able to cut down every tactic of the enemy. He came out with the power of the Holy Spirit. And as soon as he launched out of those 40 days, he was in it. He showed us what would happen once we leave the wilderness. It's in our biggest seasons. And he had that ministry afterwards. So it's really to prepare us in our identity, prepare us in who we are, and prepare us in our authority, so that when we leave there, we know who the source is of our power, our provision, and our protection, but also that we know who we are and what we operate in because of the Lord.
Okay, so I'm going to unpack, I'd like you to unpack one thing for me, and that's the wilderness is to prepare us for identity. That identity word is thrown out so much in the church. Like, oh, we just have to learn our identity in Christ. And it's like, what the heck does that even mean in practical terms? So when you say we learn our identity, can you unpack that a little bit more?
That's a great question. To me, the first identity I had to strip away was that who I am. Who am I? And really learning that I am an accepted, loved daughter of the Most High God, and not just say that, but really believe it. Sometimes we say things that we don't believe. That's my mindset. And I also think identity was me learning, who am I? Who did God design me to be, as an author, right? As a woman, as a speaker, and and just everything I'm to operate in, and meaning, and I think really stripping me from my worldly views, my understanding of God, or my all the misconceptions I had of myself or God because of what society or people say to us. And so when I'm looking at identity, I'm looking at what am I believing, what am I walking in, and what are the things that God's stripping me from that I've used, I would say, in self-protection and other measures that no longer serve me. It's really
Mhm.
taking off all the old, like Isaiah 43:18 through 19 really has changed me, because before I'm like, oh, that's so wonderful. But what it is taking all the old strategies we used to use, all the protective measures, and getting rid of it so that we can walk in the new, into the wholeness that he promises when he says your soul's going to prosper. And that's across all areas: financial, emotional, physical, everything.
That's awesome. I also know that as we've worked together personally, you've been talking a lot about the self-protection.
Hmm.
And so what are some ways that we self-protect? Because when we self-protect, we're not really opening ourselves up to God as fully as we can, because we're always trying to self-protect because, maybe some things happened to us when we were younger, maybe they were older that something happened, but that triggering event that really caused that self-protection. So what do you see in that arena?
That's a great question. There's so many layers to self-protection. Self-protection is anytime we believe we can protect ourselves outside of what God is doing for us, his covering, meaning self-protection can be us abusing food, or going to shopping, or going to drinking, or even in relationship to get the source that God can only give us. And so what we're constantly doing, but underlying that self-protection, that's not the root of it. A lot of times self-protection, especially in addiction, is anger and wrath. It could be at ourselves, it could be self-hatred, it can be also anger at God. Perhaps things are going too long, or perhaps we just really haven't gotten to the bottom of it. And so it's been an interesting journey as we go through this stuff, that I found in my own journey, that a lot of self-protection for me was me hiding, but also me not getting to the emotions that I needed to do. I was numbing them.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
then, like, when things didn't change, when I was getting away from the self-protection, I was getting frustrated because I didn't see changes in my new ways. And so there was still like self-protection with that, because then I was sort of like in between. I'm like, okay, what do I do? And so I think for self-protection, it's a lot of getting out of hiding. It's a lot of allowing God to help us be more vulnerable, and that is where we get to a different mindset, and it takes time.
So it sounds like in your wilderness season, you really one of the things you went through was that whole taking off that protective cloak of self-protection.
Yeah.
What are some other things that you had to let go of or deal with in your wilderness season?
I would say I like planning. I'm also flexible. But I would say letting go of understanding God's time and mine, because I had gotten a lot of words by God. He's like, and he knows me, like he gives me a word and I'll do it. It's
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
I mean, mostly, I mean, he's had to teach me, but if he says, I'm like, oh, good. So he'd give me a word, and I had to learn how to ask him questions. So if he's like, yeah, do this. Okay. Is this now or is this later? Um,
Yeah.
do you want me to do this now? And some were nows, and some he's still developing. And that's also with my co-reigning with him, my agreements, the way, and so that was a big one, was the timing. And also understanding that when I said yes, and he's like, this is what's happening, I had this idea that, ooh, everything's going to just right away fall into place.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yes, God, I said, yes, I'm moving out of this. And it was the biggest risk of my life. Like Sherry, I think I had shared this with you, but I consider it, the biggest thing was learning that I wanted the mini roller coaster. A lot of times we want a mini roller coaster. We want like the very easy kiddie one. And God's like, oh, we're going to the big one. We're going to like the ones that you go upside down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and that to me was I knew that of the Lord, but when you say yes, you literally are alive because you are for the ride of your life because I don't know. I say yes, and I'm like, okay, God, what does this look like? And He's like, you have all you need. I'm like, okay, and
And you go shoom right down.
yes,
Yeah, we have a ride in Southern California, Magic Mountain called Goliath. And I
okay,
think it pulls something like 3 Gs or 5 Gs. And I almost got knocked out. When I got done off the ride, I couldn't stand. It kind of for 3 seconds, things got really black and fuzzy and kind of feel like that's the wilderness sometimes, you
yeah.
know?
And actually the name of that ride, because I was going to say my local park, but it may not be. No one might know that. But the Goliath is interesting because that's a giant. I think we learn to slay how God slays giants in the wilderness, or how we can lay down our own giants, or things that we've had be in the way of us moving to the promised land. So I think that Goliath one is pretty big because God's like, oh yeah, you can take that out with me. Let's go. And that's so I like that it was Goliath. It was interesting because that reminded me of the giants that we do, like we overcome in the wilderness, just like Jesus overcame. He already did, but He was like, no, Satan, I know who I am. I know what I'm called to do, and I'm not letting you delay it.
That's good. What was your biggest fear going through the wilderness? Because I know that there's a lot of fear because over a lot of different things. It's not just like conquering the territory, but it's internal fears and other types of fears.
That's great. I would say some of my fears, God's been working on me in the area of money mindset. That's something big over the last year and a half. When I said yes, He's continuously had me invest or say, hey, give this. And also, I think how we believe about money impacts us. So my thoughts about money as an author, as a speaker, as a woman needed some support,
Yeah.
so that as I move forward, that would be good. And that was the biggest fear for me, I think, that I've had to overcome is, okay, I've given everything, or I'm giving this. What does that look like? And God coming through sometimes at the last minute, or
Most
what
of the time at the last minute.
yeah, well, yeah, or sometimes He's like, well, you have what you need to do this. And I'm like, really? So that's been an interesting part, and trusting Him with bills, right? Or trusting Him in circumstances that I've never been to this place. So now I'm trusting God with my finances. I'm trusting God's promises, and I'm overcoming those fears by His word. And also I'm looking at, what do I really believe? Because if there is some unbelief or doubt, that's
Mhm.
going to impact me as I move forward. So God's dealing with those fears. And the other fear for me was, I think, just how am I going to, who's going to be in my tribe? Who's going to support me? How am I going to run with people? Because for so long, I run with a lot of people, but having a tribe or having a group for me hasn't always been easy. That's a lot of my story. And so part of me was like, okay, God, this is hard, without that support. Obviously I have you, but I desire that. And God knows that desire. He knows what we need. And so that was something I had to really learn, is that He's developing it all as I trust Him.
It's almost like that next step appears when you're ready for it, when it's right in front of you, but it doesn't appear 5 steps in front of you like us planners want to know.
So yes.
Do you still feel like you're in a wilderness, or do you feel like you've crossed over? Where do you feel like you're at in the process?
It's a great question. I actually thought I was out of the wilderness till August, when God told me that, well, really, a friend was praying for me, and they said, God doesn't want you to die in the wilderness. That's not His plan for you. And I was going through a time where He asked me to go different places when I already had nothing, and He knew it would be hard, but He had me on assignment. And I was really grappling, and I've spoke to you about that when I previously, but the biggest thing, I would say, was He was getting me ready to cross over, and He's like, you
Mm,
were so close on the peak. And I would say that I am in the pinnacle of the crossover. So it's almost like when Joshua went on the land, even though it was his, and the giants may have been
yeah.
there, he had claimed it, he believed, and then he started to keep going ahead as a warrior. So I believe that things are all lining up. So as I continue to walk and agree with God, it's that this part now is, yes, things are going to move ahead, but it's taking that and continuing to take the land, knowing that you're speaking it and it's coming to fruition. So I believe I'm like really on that cusp of just coming out differently right now.
And how would people know that they're coming out? Like you thought you were coming out before, but it really wasn't, and now you can see how you really are coming out now. So how would you help people navigate if they really are coming out or if they're still in it?
Yeah. That's a great question. I would say a lot of it's mindset. I was still even now. There's times where I'm navigating and checking, what am I believing, or if I'm having any type of not having peace. Okay, what am I starting to move it back into? One of the big indicators is peace. One of the big
Mm,
indicators is having peace internally. Not that it's perfect, but you're going to have circumstances, but learning how to have peace and rest. When we learn how to rest in God, he said that was a promise. He went after the sixth day and rested. So he's been teaching me even now during these dire circumstances how to rest, even when things look, I would say, cray. I'm going to use that word. When things look so different. And each day I'm learning how to do that. Each day when something goes wrong, how am I going to respond? Like last week of technology's been an interesting journey for me recently. And I love technology, but when that happens, how am I responding? Am I going to have a mindset that it's going to be okay? It is going to be okay. But what am I thinking? And so when you start to have a new thinking that God's still working things for good, I'm coming out of this. I'm not allowing the big disappointments to knock me down, the doubts. If I have those thoughts, I'm shifting them right away versus getting stuck in them. And that's something that I really learned, because I was like, wow, my mindset and my thinking have shifted so much. Do I still have moments where there's that testing of how my endurance and my strength? Yes, but it's different. I can get that thought right away. And then if there are more things, then I know how to ask God, what do you want me to do? So one big thing is peace, more of the joy. It's knowing that you're loved. It's walking in of rest. When we have rest and ease, that's where things flow. That's where the rivers of God flow. So you're going to notice that even when there's harder things happening, you're still flowing because you've come to a place where God's met you and you trust him, you know him. And I liken it to Ezekiel. This is a story that I've grappled with God for years. At first, it was when God gave him an assignment. He's like, okay, I want you to use human dung instead of cow dung.
oh yeah.
He feels like, no, like I don't want to, right? Like he was talking with God, and obviously we can, but later in the story, and his maturity with God was different, where God told him, your wife's going to die the next day, which I'm like, that's a different, Sherry.
That's horrible.
And he's like, don't show emotion. And me as like emotional pain, I like look at that. I was like, God, I don't get that. Like I understand obedience. And what he showed me was Ezekiel had such a history with God and such a trust with God through all these different things that he trusted God with his wife. Maybe at some point he was able to grieve, but he had such a history with God and rest in God and trust in God's plan that he didn't respond the way he used to. He didn't have to ask God, hey, X, Y, Z. And I thought that was interesting when God explained that to me. So
Mhm.
that's a thought. That's my thoughts on it.
That's kind of heavy. I mean, that we definitely would have to unpack on another session because that's really, really heavy. But what I'm getting from what you're saying is the whole point of the wilderness is that stripping away to where it doesn't matter what circumstances
Mhm.
you're going through, you find that rest and that peace in the
Yes.
midst of chaos or in the midst of peace. And it doesn't matter what's happening around you when you get to that point. And that level of trust with the Lord, of trusting him through everything.
Yeah, that level of trust. And that's always the continual journey, even when we're out of that. And definitely it is the mindset. And I agree that's a great way to talk about what I just did, the circumstances, because it is, no matter what happens, God is still good. And that we're still going to say our yes. We're going to keep walking through, and we're not going to stop. Like Joshua, to me, was a leader that said, no, we can do anything. He had the mindset that any land could be taken. And because of that, he took land all the way through his whole life. Even when he got older, he was still strong. And he believed, and he even encouraged other people, but not everybody took the land. There were people like in that whole tribe that didn't. They're like, oh, they're too strong. But Joshua always kept his eyes on the Lord, and he could see because he was not looking at the earthly vision. He was looking at God's perspective and looking out on a higher plane. And so once we get to that, out of that part of that wilderness, we can see what's ahead and we can see what's ours, and we can keep forging ahead and conquer it because of our history with God, and because of we know like this is the word we're standing on.
That's awesome. What was your hardest time in the wilderness where you were just kind of on your knees crying, wondering when this will ever end? What was that hardest point in the journey for you?
The hardest part for me in the journey was all these promises God had. You know, people would always say, "Oh, God has great, good plans." Jeremiah 29:11, and God gave. And I think the biggest thing for me was grappling with the promises He had for me that I didn't see anything yet. You know, I hadn't seen still, you know, my husband or marriage or all these different promises hadn't come to fruition, and yet God's dealing with my heart, but I hadn't seen that. And that was the biggest thing of disappointments, of like one after another of disappointment and not having hope. And and trying to dream, but every time getting pummeled or having people
Yeah.
leave, and the isolation, just the pain of like other people not understanding or going there. Because when you say yes to God, there is this time where He is getting you ready, and you may or may not have people that understand your journey. They may join you at different times, but it's a complete stripping away in some ways, not in a bad way. He's not punishing us. What He's doing is actually promoting us. And that was my biggest confusion, was that when we're having that time, it's for promotion, meaning He's trusting us in a higher level to step up
Mhm.
into something greater, and He's preparing us in all the areas of our heart that could be blind spots. And if we don't deal with it, you see in the Bible so many times so many people
Yeah.
fell. And honestly, Sherry, I had asked God that years ago. I said, God, I pray that you only raise me up when I have the character and the integrity, and that my heart is right in with you, and that I keep with you, because I don't want to be raised up until you have integrity in me, you know,
Yeah.
be in
Yeah.
a place where I'm not just doing the scripture, and I'm not, my heart's there for the reasons you have, the fear of the Lord. And
Yeah.
I meant that because I could see so many people that, you know, have gone through the journey and they started, and then people are like, whoa, and they still, their character is still being built, and there's deeper things. And
Mhm.
even in some of the New Testament, the soul, our soul is, you know, just the whole being. God wants to deal with our whole being. Yes, He has plans for us, but it's our whole being that He wants in alignment, so that when we walk out, we're not going to be sides. Uh, we're not going to have something that like takes us out later.
That's so good. And all the words you used, I could totally relate. Like I always use the word plummeted. I mean, and that's not a normal everyday word I use. But a lot of the verbiage that you used in that was exactly the same, where you feel like you're all alone.
Mhm.
Nobody gets it. I mean, even I think I've shared this before, but I went to a well-known speaker and just poured out my heart, and I'm crying, and this lady's looking at me like I'm absolutely nuts. And I could
Mhm.
just, and then it was like, oh, she doesn't get it. She just has no idea. It's not her fault. She just hasn't been there. And so it's just wild. And I think that's why it's been on my heart to create this wilderness community through the podcast, and we're doing some other things as well. But I just really wanted people to know you're not alone. I mean, there is a part of the journey that's the dark night of the soul where it's just you and God. But it's nice to know that there is a community that understands you, because the children of Israel went together through the wilderness. It wasn't one by one by one. You know, they did go together through that.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for sharing that. What would you tell somebody that's in a wilderness season now? How would you encourage them?
I would encourage them with something God gave me recently, which is, He said, it's okay to dream again and hope again. He's not going to disappoint you. If God brings you to the wilderness, it's because He is getting you ready to bring fruit to your life, to restore you for redemption. And even when it doesn't feel like it, to anything he's given you in your journal, anything he's given you as words, to have that, and to continue to just seek him, but speaking that over you, even on the hardest day, to remember to dream again, that he won't disappoint you. And even when it looks completely different than what you think, knowing that he has you. And I'll leave you with this, with it, is that when you're in that time, God will give you hope, and he'll give you little encouragements himself, because he is such
Yeah.
a love.
Mhm.
And for me, it was little things, like he told me that, and then he would, give me little reminders, or bring up in my journal, bring me back to a place where he confirmed his word for me. And just those words. And even actually during my hardest summer, oh, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to go. I couldn't even get out of bed. And during that time, he gave me Romans 15:13, and it was, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace,
Oh,
and
wow.
you trust him, and he'll give you hope. And God knew that I didn't have it. I was hopeless. I was feeling abandoned. I was so full of heartbreak and loss. And I cried every day on my face. Like, I remember the songs, I remember the people that I like, the songs and the people that I was on my face with, and Carrie Job with I Am Not Alone, and all these things,
That you loop all day long.
yeah, and and like, he had like You Speak, and just like that, laying down other things that took the first love part away, and he
Mhm.
just wanted me to feel his love and receive it. So I'm just hoping today, if you feel like you're not loved, or like it seems like he's silent, he's working, and just continue to seek him, and and have those scriptures. I had it on my wall. I had these wall of scriptures I had right every day in my journal, and just allowing him to heal me in different ways. So that's my hope for you, is that dream again, allow him to heal you, and he promises so much better than
That's
even in
awesome.
it.
That's awesome. I love that. And I remember going through the wilderness and he would always say, "Do you trust me? Do you trust me? Do you trust me?" And then later in the wilderness, he explained it a little bit more and he said, "I I trust you through this season and to come out and do all that I've called you to do. How much more can you trust me if I trust you as a human?" And it was like, oh, like, how could you say no to that? I mean, he's literally, if you think about it, when he sent Jesus to die on the cross, he gave everything and
Mhm.
he trusted that there would be people that would respond to that. And he gave it all.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of God trusting us through the process as well.
Mhm.
And I love what you said where you said, "God, I don't want to get there until the character in me has developed to such a level
Mhm.
that I can withstand the growth that's about to hit." And I can't tell you how many times I've prayed that, which is similar to what you were talking about.
Yeah, it was, because yeah, I didn't want that without having the change in my heart. And I want to share, you mentioned something about, or something was small, and I think one misconception we have of Jesus, and I think this goes into mindset and poverty mindset, is that when Jesus went on the cross and he died for all of us, that wasn't small. That was, he played big,
He played big,
because
yeah.
he played big, and his mindset was always big. Like, he came into the world and bam, I'm going to have everybody. And I think we think, okay, he came in with nothing, but he came in with everything. He showed us how to go through, and how he continued to grow, right, expand
Mhm.
and expand his influence. And I think that that's a big misconception that people have, that, oh, Jesus lived in poverty and all this stuff. He always had people who provided for him, and he could do that. And he was in all kinds of houses. So yes, like, it might not look like we thought, but he had a rich mindset of, I'm going to expand this wealth. I'm going to give this to the people, in different ways than we think. And so I think God had to also show me, no, I'm not small in anything, not even in my son who came, and even the cross was huge.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I feel like in the wilderness too, one of the analogies I got was of a card game, when you play poker or a card game with chips.
Hmm.
And when you give God your yes, you're basically putting all of your chips in the middle of the table in the
Hmm.
pot, and it's chips and each chip represents something different. You're putting a chip of relationship. You're putting a chip that represents walking away from relationships that you need to. You're putting a chip of, hey, I put my finances on the line and I
Mhm.
sell the dream home to go after you, or whatever it is. But each of those are chips that we put in the middle of the table. And it
Mhm.
was such a beautiful analogy when I was coming out of the wilderness. I remember him saying, um, take the pot is yours. And I
Mhm.
saw myself, the vision that I saw was my hand like reaching around and grabbing all of the chips. And
Mhm.
what he was showing me is I not only won my chips back, so to speak, but better, obviously, but I
Mhm.
won everybody else's at the table.
Mm.
And he said, he said, call the enemy's bluff and take the pot.
Mm.
And it was almost like it reminded me of that story of David at Ziklag, where the enemy came and took all of the stuff, and then David's men wanted to kill him. But
Mhm.
at the end, God said, "No, I'm gonna give you victory," and he went after all the guys and basically killed them all. But he not only took their own spoil back, but he got the spoil of all the tribes around him,
Mhm.
or all the other nations that they had, went after. So not only did he get his own stuff back, but he got all of it. And that's what I feel like when we put our chips in the middle during the wilderness season, there's going to be a time where we get to take the pot, and the pot is way more than we've ever put in the middle.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that analogy, and that is very true about it. But we don't see that at the time, Sherry. And
No, no.
he sees bigger than we do. That's why he always says, my thoughts are higher. And I'm like, definitely are, because sometimes, God's way of the finances and everything else that we say yes to, he knows what's coming, but we're like, oh, right. So I love
Yeah.
that analogy. I love that. That's really powerful.
Well, do you have any last minute words for our listeners that are in the wilderness season?
I would say to be encouraged, and also it's okay. Whatever you're feeling, feel it, be honest with God,
Yeah.
and write that down, even journal the things that he's teaching you, and you'll have the right people around you. Sometimes people may not understand, that could be painful, but just know that he won't disappoint you. I know I'm coming back to that. Keeping hope, he promises to get you forth, and allow him to be your manna. It's a time where you're learning God is your manna, and
Yeah. Yeah.
thankful for it, no matter what it looks like. And when it comes, he's promising to give you the manna. He's promising to give you the oil, and he always does. He will do it when you say yes, and as you're continuing with your heart posture towards him. So
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And I want to make a quick announcement because you are now part of what we are creating for the wilderness community. And so I'd really love to tell our listeners what we're up to these days. And I prayed about it, and I really feel strongly that the Lord wants me to create a more intimate support system for people in the wilderness season. So, what we're calling it is Wilderness Warrior Elevation. And it's going to include a 10-week wilderness support weekly. It will also include a prayer intercessory team with some prophetic words, because I know that's what really helped me through is my Bible, reading the word, and my prophetic words. But those prophetic words I hung on to those. And then we're bringing on board Dr. Amanda Helman, yay, for wilderness mindset coaching.
mhm.
So I know going through it, I had heavy disappointment. So there's a lot of stuff that needed to get broken off on me during that wilderness season, and now even coming out. And so we are creating this Wilderness Warrior Elevation Program. And if you're interested, you can email info@squaretreepublishing.com. We'll go ahead and put a link in the notes for now. It's just a placeholder to know as we're developing this out. We would love for you in the comments or to email us. What do you want us to build for you as a community? I know what I needed, and I know, I've gotten input from others, but I would love to know, what do you need? And we can build it for the community.
Mhm.
So thank you so much, Amanda. I'm so looking forward to this new this new aspect and this new thing that we're doing. And as we always say, do it scared, right?
Yes, do it afraid. And
Do it afraid.
I'm excited too, Sherry. I'm really honored to be alongside for this, and to see how this all look for all of you out there, and really to know you're supported during this journey.
And I love the fact that you've been through the wilderness
Mhm.
and you're the wilderness mindset coach and you're a doctor. So it's like the best of all three worlds. It's like can't get any better than that. So you really need somebody that has understood the process and has gone through it
Mhm.
to really help with the mindset shifts that need to happen to come out. So I'm just so thankful you came into our lives as an author, Square Tree, and your book's coming out soon.
Yes.
So we'll go ahead and put a link in there as well. You want to tell them a little bit about your book?
Sure. The title of my book is called Silent No Longer: Finding My Voice After Complex Trauma. And that was one of the biggest things as a speaker for me to do, is to unlock my voice. And it's my journey. God asked me to write my story 2.5 years ago. And then last year I met with Sherry in October and started the process this year. And I'm excited for women and people to be impacted, to know that you're not alone and that there's ways to overcome some of the deepest rejection and pain and experiences that we really, as human beings, never were intended to have, but how to overcome that and walk in freedom.
That's so awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the wilderness season.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Until next time, we'll see you on the Wilderness Season podcast.
Bye.
Hey guys, it's Sherry Ward here with a really quick announcement. I am so excited that my next book, Crossing the Jordan, Navigating Life's Transition and Changes, is coming out soon. It's in the final editing stage. It'll be the second book in the trilogy. So the first one is the Wilderness Season, and then we've got this Crossing Over season. And it is an actual season. Nobody talks about it. It's the tail end of the wilderness and what happens right before you come out of the wilderness and go into your promised land. So stay tuned. We would love to have you on the Zoom call for our book launch coming up soon. All right, until next time, see you later. Thank you for listening to the Wilderness Season podcast. If you need help navigating through your own wilderness season, pick up a copy of my book, A Journey Out of the Wilderness, available on Amazon. Also, continue the conversation online with us by going to our Wilderness Season Facebook page. For resources and events, you can go to www.sherrylynnward.com. If you have enjoyed this show, please subscribe and review our podcast. Just remember, you're not alone.